To our district now, or our region, I should say, and hundreds of people from the East Ramapo School District were in Albany today pushing for more state oversight of the school district. A state-appointed monitor says the school board has mismanaged the district's finances and also favored private schools at the expense of public schools and their students. The board in East Ramapo is controlled by a majority of Hasidic and Orthodox Jews. They tend to overwhelmingly send their kids to the private schools and take money away from the public school system in order to facilitate that process. This is an issue that I have covered extensively on the FiOS weekend show that I do called Newsbreakers. A lot of the East Ramapo and New Square are in Rockland County. That is your neck of the woods. There are similar communities in Kiryas Joel, which was in your district. And it seems like the questions always come down to whether there's an inadvertent amount of political influence that's being garnered by these communities and whether they're treated fairly or so fairly that it's actually at the expense of other students. And we'll start with you, Scott. What's your take on the monitor situation in East Ramapo? If you had the authority to sign off on a monitor, would there be one?
Well, I think a monitor is a good idea, but we've talked about this to help the school board and to assure the school board does the right things for all the students of the district. The problem, of course, is that I think there's a legal issue as to whether you can put somebody in charge of duly elected board members. I don't care who they are. I think there's a serious constitutional issue there. I don't know if they're dealing with that in Albany. I have not read the state legislation, but there's no question in our community of East Ramapo, the East Ramapo School District, that there's tension between those who are in the public school system and don't feel that they're getting enough resources, all sorts of resources, and those who control the board. When I was a county executive, I kept trying to bring people together because in the end, that's what you got to do somehow. The question of how well a person can oversee and overrule a legitimate school board is one that I'm uncertain about. However, having said that, the tensions there are high. Most of the children who attend the public schools are of color. Many of them can't speak English. The Orthodox children and the communities are building fast, and of course they go to private school. The tensions, it's palpable there, and anything that can be brought together to bring the communities together is a good thing.
I've talked to a lot of people who say there's an inordinate amount of political power that seems to be in these communities. They have a lot of voting power. They tend to get a lot of political advantages or favors that are done for them. But they say, no, we're exercising our democratic right. We're exercising our influence, our whatever political influence we have, in the same way that any other group would do, whether it be a Jewish group or an African American group or whatever the basis of the group happens to be. Are they? We'll get to you in 1 second, Don. Congresswoman, do they seem to have an outside voice or an outsized voice in the politics in our region?
Well, the principle is valid that yes, they as citizens have a right to vote as they choose to vote. And yes, are they well organized? Absolutely. But it is precisely because they are a very particular type of community that they have large block votes. And politicians of all stripes certainly seek not to run afoul of them, certainly hope to get their votes, and a lot of times you can tell from just going as I have done. You know, I toured the village of Kiryas Joel and was given an enumeration of all the gifts from all the different politicians. By the way, one of the reprehensible aspects of that is that these politicians are credited, instead of saying this was paid for by the taxpayers of the state of New York or this was paid for by the taxpayers of the United States, instead it's Senator Gillibrand got us this magnificent floor, and yet it's really not a public facility. So this deserves scrutiny, and I'm glad Preet Bharara, I know, has been looking into some aspects of the dealings of these communities, and rightly so.
Dom?
First of all, full disclosure, my kids were educated in the East Ramapo School District. I know firsthand what it's like dealing with the school district because my son needed special services and he was denied special services until I hired a lawyer to come in, and then the door opened. But even then, they would not pay for him to go to a private school, right? But so yet, you have 29,000 Hasidim children. They're all funneled at taxpayer expense for a private school education. Taxpayer expense, taxpayer expense. And then the pie becomes that much smaller and the Black and Latino kids are left with nothing. Now you do the math.
They have a right to that
They
to that
do.
public
And
expense.
see, the county executive is right, and that's my point to the black community in Rockland County. Listen, that's the system. If the Hasidim register, turn out en masse, and vote, and occupy the board, that's the system.
I got about a minute to go around on this, but I was interviewing Chris Day, who is the son of your successor as Rockland County Executive, who was the congressional candidate who lost to Anita Lowy in the last election. Covers that region where New Square is and where East Ramapo is. He said at the end of the interview that New Square, and I assume he would agree that a community like Curious Joel or others should be desegregated. And that kind of caught me off guard because I had not heard that before. I want to go around. I want to put everybody.
In other words, welcome or be required to have other residents live within those villages?
Should those all-inclusive Hasidic communities be desegregated?
I don't think they should get special favors from county governments, but I don't think that a forced desegregation would succeed. It would not be something that I think would be palatable to any members of the community.
Scott?
No, I don't think so. I mean, they are a secular group. They're insular, and where people live is up to them, ultimately. The issue, though, going back, is not just that. You need people to vote. And a lot of the folks who are not from the Hasidic communities do not vote or can't read English. I mean, there's a whole, you go back to the social justice issue. There needs to be change there, and it's not just the votes. I have had their support, and I've not had their support, and I've won. So, I mean, this can happen.
It's an incredibly complicated issue. We're going to take a break here on RFL and move on to another complicated issue. Up next, Pope Francis is making a big new push to rally the world to fight global warming. He's going to do so when he speaks to Congress in September. It's going to come up. It'll be interesting to see how Republican climate deniers deal with that one. We're going to get into it with the panel next.